Hello, my name is Kenneth Acha. Today I'm going to be talking about the decomposition of a passage, how you break down a passage into its constituent parts so that you can study the passage, and doing so helps you understand how the passage was put together by the author, so that by understanding how it was put together, you determine the author's purpose. This is a very crucial part of understanding the meaning of a passage, a book, a literary piece of any type. So I'm going to try to do a type of chart and use arrows. Say we start with a passage right here. And our passage here would be any book. Say you are trying to read a book from the New Testament, or any literature book, for example. And if you were to take that book, just imagine taking that book and breaking it down into its constituent parts. What you will get, just use your imagination, will be words. Say you just break down that passage, or pulverize it if you want to use that word, and then the dust pieces, the blocks you will get, will be words, and we call them terms. And they're really words. The reason we call them terms is because each of those words within its context has only one meaning. Words that have been limited to only one meaning because of the context in which you put them are called terms. For example, the word love. If you look in the dictionary, it would have multiple meanings. But if you were to be reading a book and in a sentence you see the word love used, you could guarantee it's a law that it can only have one meaning. It cannot have two. It may have typological meanings, but the literal sense is only one meaning that is intended by the author. So we have, when we start breaking it down, again, use your imagination, and if you have little children around you, you would see them spell and write with block numbers and block letters. If you were to crumble those down, you would get words. If you were to just break down everything they've written, you get, yes, letters, but we're going to start with words. You get the ones that will convey meaning will be words. So we're going to start with words, and the words are terms. Another thing that you'll get from there is that these words in a passage are held together by a structure. So you get structure. Words doesn't just appear without any structure. Words always have structure in a passage, and we're going to break this structure down in a little bit. So the structure is what you will call the glue and the framework. The framework of the passage is the glue and the framework. The framework would be the pillars. Imagine a building, the pillars and the beams. A very good analogy would be the building analogy that I'm introducing right now. You would have words or terms which are building blocks. Go back here. Building blocks. And you would have the structure that is the glue, the mortar, and also the pillars and the beams. Those in a real house will form the structure of the house, and in a passage it's also true. Then you'll have a third component. So this is the first component. The most basic one is terms. The second is that we look at here is the structure that holds. The structure holds the terms together, but it also provides a framework, the backbone, the spine that holds everything together, the passage. And the third one that we see here is that we are going to also, besides the structure, see the literary form. The literary form, now we're talking about things such as, is the type of passage poetry? Is it narrative? Is it apocalyptic? Is it a parable? those kinds of things. That is the literary form. Then the fourth and final component that you'll have in a passage is called the atmosphere. And the atmosphere basically refers to the emotional tone. Every author conveys an emotional tone in the passage when they write it. So remember, these four components always are present in every passage, like a good piece, a composition, an article that is written. A key thing to remember is that every single author that writes a piece has a purpose behind it. And the purpose for which they are writing will determine the structure. It will determine the words they use. It will determine the literary form that they use. And it will determine the tone, the emotional tone that they use to communicate. That's important. So now that we've looked at this four, we're going to go into a little bit of detail now. We've sort of concluded with terms. We're going to end there and say, in a passage you have the words, the terms. Again, terms because each word has only one meaning. And when you're studying a passage, you're going to note some important words, which will be important terms because they only have one meaning. And those words are called keywords or key terms, if you choose to call it that way. These keywords are going to be words that you want to note because keywords are words that are crucial to understanding the meaning in the passage that is intended by the author. The author always wants to say something, and so he chooses words. So there are many words in a language that a person can use to convey meaning about something. But when I want to say something, or when you want to say something, Alex, you choose a specific word because you know that that word conveys a thought that you have. It conveys a purpose. So there is something called selectivity that is important to consider because every author is always in a position where they have at their disposal a lot of ammunition, a lot of words to use. They choose certain words and they choose certain structure to be able to communicate their message because they know that that structure carries their purpose most effectively. And guys, one of the things to remember is that we are raised up in a way that because of our human nature, we have a rational capacity that our genes carry, that language is something that only us and a very, very, very limited number of other species even come close to being communicative as we are. And so we have a genetic predisposition for that. And also, as we grow up as children, there is that formation, educational formation and cultural formation that teaches us these literary laws, the laws of grammar and the laws of logic that we all follow. If you go into any culture, it's not limited to the century that we are in right now. It's not limited to Africa, Asia, Europe, America. Everywhere where there are human beings, there is a communication going on. It may be primitive by our definition, but it follows laws because people communicate and others understand and respond. So there are laws that bind communication together. And so, again, coming back to keywords are going to be crucial words that help us understand the meaning of the author. And so we'll need to note keywords. And I also am reviewing now. I also talked about the fact that there is purpose for which every author communicates. Whether they are thinking of the purpose or not, every author communicates with purpose. And I also said that there are laws that are followed. And we might go into them a little bit if time permits. But there are laws that are followed when we communicate, that when you decipher a passage like this, you reach at the purpose of the author most precisely, because in the formation process, the author employs these same laws. Okay. So we have keywords that we've talked about here, and we said literary form was parables and poetry and narrative and stuff like that. And the atmosphere, the emotional tone could be anger, could be joy, it could be gratitude, it could be just gratitude, however you spell it. It could be just calmness, it could be terror. Yes, but the emotional tone. Now, I'm going to break down structure a little further, because structure has a lot more that I want us to look at. So we're going to go further and break structure down. Now, I mentioned that structure is the glue, and that structure is the framework. And picture words to be the blocks of a building. The blocks of a building. Can you picture that? Yeah, picture words to be the blocks. And then there is a type of mortar that you use, that you hold the blocks together to form a wall of a building. That's different from the pillars that also have mortar. So we're going to divide structure. There is grammatical structure, and there's literary structure. Okay? Now, grammatical structure occurs within a paragraph, not a passage, within a paragraph. Note this is important. Within a paragraph, between paragraphs. Okay, between paragraphs. Now, your grammatical structure is going to cover, let me go to a different page now, and I will take one arm at a time. Okay. Now, we were talking about grammatical structure. I'm going to start right up here. Grammatical structure. And we said grammatical structure covers two key things. It covers, the first thing it covers is the relationships between subjects, objects, verbs. It covers modifiers. It covers prepositions. I remember I told you that grammatical structure applies within paragraphs. And within paragraphs you have phrases, clauses, sentences. Grammatical structure holds phrases, clauses, sentences together, and it does so within a paragraph. In literary decomposition like this, in breaking apart a literary passage, the paragraph, not the sentence, the paragraph is usually considered as the unit of structure. The structural unit is the paragraph, not the sentence, because the paragraph often carries a complete thought. Sentences don't usually do, paragraphs do. So the convention is to follow the paragraph as the basic unit of thought. So that's why you see that grammatical structure covers within paragraphs, and then we said literary structure is between paragraphs. If somebody didn't see me writing and they tried to read what I wrote, they probably wouldn't be able to read. But literary structure, between. Now, let me come back to grammatical structure. Hopefully you're following. We said that we'll be talking about relationships between subjects, objects, verbs, modifiers, prepositions, and things like that. And we're not going to go into what a subject or verb and all that. I think you guys would know what that is. And if you don't, you just Google. That's taught in high school or grade school or something like that. But it's always good to review those things. Now, the other thing that is key that grammatical structure also covers is connectives. Okay, these are conjunctions. Conjunctions are connecting words in a sentence. And Every sentence, not every sentence, every literary piece would have connectives, which are conjunctions. You have things like conjunctions of cause, conjunctions of condition. Conjunctions of cause will be things like, would be phrases like for this reason, in order, as, because, and things like those are conjunctions that indicate cause. And there are conjunctions that indicate conditions, such as if you do this, I will do that. If is a conjunction of condition, giving a, unless you do this, it's a conjunction. Unless it's a conjunction of condition. In that case, that being so, those are also conjunctions of condition. So we also have conjunctions of addition and conjunctions of replacement. We have conjunctions of comparison and contrast. These are very common in many literary pieces. If you read the Bible, you see a lot of conjunctions of comparison and contrast. You will see words like as, like, likewise, also, just, and things like that used to indicate comparison. Comparison looks at things that are similar. It draws upon similarities and contrasts upon differences. And conjunctions of contrast will cover things like although, but. And you see a lot of but in the and things like that in the Bible. When you start noting these things, they help you to be able to understand the transitions that are happening, and you are more likely to be very observant and actually get what the author is saying. We've talked about in the past, Alex, that when you see the word therefore in the Bible, it's a key word to look, because it shows some drawing of conclusion. You need to ask, what is therefore? Because that therefore will always draw you to look at the context, the preceding context. Therefore, it's a conjunction. There are many other conjunctions like that. There's words like and. It's a common conjunction you see in the Bible. But, and, therefore. And there are many other ones that are not so common, but if you want to be an effective student of the Bible, you'll not limit yourself to the ones that are the easiest and the most common one. You also see conjunctions of exemplification and restatement. When somebody says, for example, it's a conjunction of exemplification. For example, for instance, to illustrate. Now, when you understand how these are put together, you all of a sudden become very observant when you read the text. You things that you'd ordinarily read through and just gloss over, you will stop and say, he's giving an example here. He's doing this. And that makes you not only somebody who sees, but somebody who observes. Then we have conjunctions of time, like words like afterward, when, and things like that. Later on, soon, until. Conjunctions of purpose, for this purpose, in order that, and words like that. And there are many other things like conjunctions of place, conjunctions that are used for emphasis, for explanation, and things like that. So these conjunctions are connective words. Okay, so they all go here as connective words. If you just type Google conjunctions, you would have many lists of conjunctions come. So the ones that I've mentioned, if you haven't gotten them all, I didn't expect you to get them all, I just was using them as illustration, then you could Google, and any basic English text will show you the most common conjunctions. Remember that if you're reading the Bible, for example, and it's written in English, you read it as an English text, knowing that the translators translated the text in such a way that you could read and get meaning, and words actually mean the same things that they would mean if you're reading another novel or English text or reading biology or chemistry. You read it that way. So we've seen that grammatical structure can be broken down into two, and that this occurs within a passage. Some books call grammatical structure and these things that happen paragraphic relations, because they happen within a paragraph. Okay. Now let's look at the literary structure. Literary structure also is going to be broken down into two key things. Okay. Let me increase the line there. And the two key things are going to be 5 types of structure and the laws of literary structure. Literary, okay, structure. Okay, let me go back for a second here to show you something. Now, when we back here we said that literary structure and grammatical structure was the glue. Let me select that back here. Was the glue, right here we said was the glue, and also the pillars. I want you to remember this, that the glue is equivalent to the grammatical structure. It glues it glues words together, because remember that words were the building blocks. You remember words were the building blocks. Imagine a brick house, really, and the words are the blocks in the brick house, and the mortar that holds those words together to form a wall is the grammatical grammatical structure, and that happens within paragraphs. And then the beams and the pillars, yes, some of them also have mortar, and we're going to see how that in real life in buildings, some beams also have mortar around them to hold them, and in reality, in the case of passages, even though literary structure is mostly beams and pillars, there are still instances where, when we look at the laws of structure, literary structure, we'll still see some things there that are the same exact things that you see in grammatical structure, such as we'll see the law of comparison and contrast. It is exactly the same thing as you would see in the grammatical structure when we looked at conjunctions. When we looked at conjunctions, we looked at them under grammatical structure, connecting words. When we are going to come here and look at, now we're dealing with pillars. We're dealing with pillars now and beams, and most of them will fall under this. That really falls under these 5 types of structures. We're going to see that under literary laws of structure, laws of literary structure, here we would also see comparison, contrast, and things like that. Very few of them, which also apply to grammatical structure, which are conjunctions. But see this perfect analogy that we've been looking at, the analogy of a building, and see that even in pillars and beams, there's still mortar. Okay, now the 5 types of structure that you will see. This may sound complicated and overwhelming. It will become really easy when you follow through, and I'll also provide a sheet that shows a chart that shows all of this that I'm going to explain. You'll see that it's very easy, and when you really understand this, it will not only help you be able to read a book like the Bible well, but any book, every book in life, you'll be able to do a lot more than you've ever done with reading. Now, the 5 types of structure. You have probably heard the 5 W's and the 1 H. Who, what, when, where, why, and how. You've probably heard about those. They're very common. They're used by journalists to write a comprehensive story, and they're very important when you're reading a passage, because you use those to interrogate the passage. If you ask those 5 questions, if you ask the 4 W's before and then why and how go together, you would get, if you ask who, you would get people. Now, what I'm using that to help you remember these 5 types of structure. Let me tell you them to you, then I'll show you how those fit. There's biographic structures. Then there is historical structure. There is geographic structure. Then there is ideological structure. And then there's chronological structure. So these are the 5 types of literary structure. Now you're saying, what are they used for? Hey, look at this. Every story, Alex, in the Bible, every story in the Bible, not only story, every passage of the Bible is either built around a key person. If you look at the stories of Joseph, it's around the key person. The key person is Joseph, right? The person Joseph is the biographic structure, the biographic pillar that holds everything in that story together. Because if you remove Joseph, that story collapses, it just crumbles. The story is written around Joseph. Some other parts of the Bible, you will see that it's not so much about a person's story, it's moving from place to place. You can write a story of moving from Africa to France to this. And the focus of the artist or the author writing the story is not so much on the person, but the place. You see a little bit of that in the Bible when you look at moving from Egypt to Sinai to Jericho to... Now, there are people involved, yes, but the places are emphasized. And what you get quickly is that the two or three can be combined. So it's not like the author has to only use one. It could be weaved together, but understanding them as distinct and then seeing when two are used and trying to see which one the author really emphasizes helps you get what the author is saying. Okay, so I've illustrated biographic and I've illustrated when it shows different places called geographic. Geographic has to do with where, with places. Okay. Now, if you read books like the book of Romans, Paul is focused on ideas, on communicating certain ideas about grace, the idea of the concept of grace. Those are built around ideologies. Ideological structure is the book of Romans has an ideological structure. Then if you look at other writers, they may be going in they're trying to write about wars. So they say in 1929 Great Depression, in 1930 this, then 1932, 1933, 1944, 1945, then 1940, whatever the Second World War, then the author uses a chronological, and you see those kinds of things happen when you read like the book of John. You often would see in the end of the first chapter, second and third, you see almost a chronology of Jesus did this, and then later in the day he did this, and then he did that. The author, yes, even though Jesus is the central figure, is also using a chronological structure and he's saying something on picking the structure that the author is using and knowing what structure, because he's communicating something. He's not just ordering the thing chronologically because he just has to. He's chosen to do that. He's chosen to tell you this happened, and then that happened, and then afterwards this happened, and then afterward that happened. He's saying something. If you don't take note of this, you could miss it. So we've seen chronological structure, ideological structure. A historic structure is a historical, not historic. A historical structure is around events. It's not places, but events. It could be around the feasts. A person could talk and then talk about their talk is focused around, say, the feast in the Old Testament or something like that. You will notice those in many different literary pieces too. So besides these 5 structures, there are no common structures that you see people write about. Every piece you would see, whether it's a fiction novel or a non-fiction novel, will usually be about this. Now, in fiction, you could give human characteristics to a robot. So it could be, the whole movie could be all about a robot, but the robot would be probably taking the place of a man or something like that. We're focusing more on real world. These are the 5 five structures that you see. And I was initially saying that if you start asking the question, who is people, that's a biographic structure. What speaks of events, what's happening, events, historical structure. You remember, history is the study of past events, past people, and their societies. That's what history is defined as. So historical is about what? Geography, you would guess, is about where, places. Then let's go to time. Chronology is about when, right? And then I said that why and how combine to give you this one. Because why questions and how questions often get people to talk about ideas. How do you do this? You will get a person to talk about their idea of how they do it. Why do you do this? Will get people to talk about reasons and ideas. So the reason I do this is because I like to link things. When in doing my research for the book that I've been working on, Alex pursuing. I'm forgetting. Pursuing Life Change. Good. I almost forgot my own book's title. Pursuing Life Change. Yes. I saw different authors write these five, but I usually try to look for connections. Why are things the way they are, so that I could see links. Then I saw that, if you ask the questions, the six questions, you will get this. And I like this because I can connect different aspects, and I know, just if you want to know what structure it is or what types of structures are there, just ask those six questions, and we learn by associating things. So good. So those are the five types of structure. And again, structure, these types of structures are so important because they are the pillars and the beams, the skeleton, the spine of every story. Every story is written with them at the center. If you remove Joseph from the story of Joseph, that covers many chapters in the book of Genesis in the Old Testament, do you have the story or book that has? You don't have. If you remove that, it's a pillar. The story is, the words are weaved around them. The words are weaved around them. They like some buildings. Buildings are constructed very differently. The pillars determine the way the pillars are built, determine the way the building will be built. So these biographic, historical, geographic, ideological, and chronological structure, that the pillars, everything else is woven around them. And understanding who the pillar is and what the type of pillar they're using quickly helps you understand the purpose, because the type of structure is chosen to communicate something. This is very important. Okay, now we talked about the laws of literary structure, and I wanted to share a few of them with you. And we talked about comparison and contrast. We talked about cause and effect. Also, these three are also laws that you would see as things that you'd see on the connective, the conjunctions, cause, comparison, contrast, cause and effect. But you also have other laws, and we're not going to go into talking about laws. We also have question and answer. It's a type of law. When you see a person writing, and you see this, we're studying the book of James right now and using it for a course, and James asks several times, he asks questions. And when a person asks the question becomes an important thing, and the next thing he's about to say is going to answer that question. Many times people who don't understand these ways of writing and how things flow, they may see a question asked, and many times people, when a question is asked, a person might not quickly see how the two connect, because in the Bible, certain verses, they just look like they came from different worlds, but they're close to each other. And I often say that verses in the Bible are like links in a chain. They are very connected. And they're connected because they have this structure holding them. They have a structure that holds them. And when you identify and know what kind of structure, it helps you a lot. So besides cause and effect, comparison, contrast, question and answer, you have many others like climax and repetition and interchange, purpose, and many others that we're not going to talk about. So let's see what else I haven't shared with you. We've talked about the fact that if you take a passage and you shred it down to its pieces, you will get terms. Number 1, 2, structure. Number 3, literary form. And we said the literary form is like parables and things like that. Parables and poetry and narrative. Just to make sure people who are reading the Bible, Jesus used a lot of parables in the Gospels. So that's important. Poetry, the Psalms, and the Proverbs. Narrative, you see a lot of narrative in the stories, in the historical passages in the Old Testament, and there's narrative also in the New Testament. The book of Acts follows a narrative. Okay. Now, when we talked about atmosphere, the tone, we said that if you take a passage and just broke it down, you will get these 4 pieces that are important, and that these 4 pieces are the same exact pieces that we consciously or unconsciously use when we want to write a piece. A good person who is writing, say, a fiction book knows that he has to choose who his characters are in the story. And his characters then end up, especially his main character, end up forming a biographic structure that follows him to the book. There may be other structures that are put, but he has to choose his characters and then a plot. He uses, because his plot in a novel will follow a chronology. There will be both a biographic structure and a chronological structure. To anybody who's writing a novel, they pick that. Whether they think about this structure or not, they're doing it. And they're doing that because that's how our genes and our training everywhere in the world, in every society, from the beginning of time, from the time men first set foot on earth, people have been communicating and understanding one another, and people have been following laws of logic, and have been following laws of grammar, and every language has its own grammar and its own forms and things like that. And that we said that when you understand all these things, it helps you to be able to not only understand the meaning of the passage, but understand the purpose for which the author wrote the passage, and that will help you to be able to understand a lot, because the purpose that the author writes determines a lot of things. It determines which words he chooses. It determines the structure he uses. It determines whether he writes poetry or he writes narrative. It determines whether he's angry. If he's writing because he wants to scold, like the book of Galatians, Paul is furious when he writes to the Galatian Christians. So you can see the tone in parts of it is one of anger. You foolish Galatians, who has bewitched you? You can't read the book of Galatians and not see that Paul is furious at what they're doing. The atmosphere of the book. And yeah, what an author has to say determines the structure. Paul probably wasn't thinking, oh, the structure of my passage is going to be the terms, this, and then I'm going to show the atmosphere and be angry at these people No. You don't have to. It's the laws that our rational, intelligent, communicative minds follow when we're going to write or speak in ways other people will understand. Without following those laws, whether we know it or we don't, then we couldn't understand each other. But we do, and we follow them.